Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to integrate Elasticsearch into your Django Flask application using the request package instead of the Django DSL normal package, because it's actually quite easy and offers you a lot more flexibility. So essentially what I have here is you can see a very basic Django application, and I've essentially set it up so that way I can show you in a very simple way of how to integrate it in Elasticsearch. So essentially the application just consists of two components, an HTML search page and a results page, as well as a MySQL database that is linked to a search model. In this case, I have gone through all of my local machines. I think I have like 5 or 6 different computers in the house. And what I did is I run a program that kind of goes through and classifies them in certain characteristics and pushes them to our AWS cloud. So that way when my wife and I have any questions about where a certain file is, we can just go search in our application and know which computer we have to go to. So in this case, it shows that I've already ran it through 7 of our local machines. So essentially getting started, the normal Django way of searching is actually pretty easy. So essentially you have a home page in this case, and you have some tag, usually they call it Q, which is just a form with an input field and a submit button. So that essentially is this here. And you pass that field on to your view, and within your view you can either build like a Q search function, or you can just call the item directly after pulling the user input with a GET request or POST request. Doesn't really matter. This is the normal Django way of doing it, and then it returns you a query set object which you pass to your front end via usually a dictionary. So in this case, if I were to search something, like I know a file that I have here is called something. If I were to search something, then essentially what I do, if I spell it right, it pulls me up one item. Here in this case, these are all test files because I didn't want to show all of my personal stuff on YouTube. But I can hit take me to the file, and in the production version of the application, it sends me directly of the computer where that file is located. Okay, so the way you can insert Elasticsearch into your application is you can either just use the DSL, which I wouldn't recommend because it actually ventures very far away from the Elasticsearch documentation. It tries to make things simpler, but sometimes you might need to do something that you can find in the documentation here, but you don't know how to make the Django DSL work in that way. And that's what I found, which was kind of frustrating. So in order to implement this, what I did was I essentially created a class with 2 methods, and I moved it to its own directory. In this case, I just called it Elasticsearch. It's in a very normal class structure, and as you see here, it relies on the package request. So if you don't have it installed, you can just do a pip install request package command. But the structures looks a little complicated because the production ready version has a lot more components, but I just stripped it down to make it the simplest for this video. So when this class is instantiated, you can pass in a specific host, or in this case, if you're on your local machine, it's localhost port 9200. I have a static method to build a URL string. In this case, I don't really need to be a static method, but I do in my production application, and I just forgot to remove it. The heart of the search is actually done here in this method called full text search. So essentially it needs the specific index and the query string that you're trying to search. So whatever the user put in that field, I kind of needed to get here. So first thing I do is I build the default URL string, and then I need to prepare the parameters that are going to be passed into this to this URL with the GET request. And that happens here. I'll explain the fields and the return field in a second. So essentially I had a problem that I couldn't solve with the Django DSL, and I went to the Elasticsearch homepage and I found exactly what I wanted to do according to the documentation. And I tried, I think, for too long at this point, to figure out how to do a request like this, for example, using the DSL. It was a much more complicated query, but I couldn't figure out how to do it with the Django DSL, which was really frustrating because the Elasticsearch documentation showed me how to do it, and the middleware that was involved couldn't, which was just very frustrating for me. And so essentially what I did is I just copied and pasted exactly what I found on the Elasticsearch homepage. I changed a few things because the fields that I wanted depended on the search that I wanted to do. In this case, if I wanted to get the items back of all items, then I can say just fields is, I can just remove this and it would search and return all fields back from my database for a specific object. Or I can provide it a specific field that I want back. So in this case, when you want to tie it in with the Django ORM, you need the primary key of the item you're pulling. So let's just do the return field, which is file ID, which I know is the primary key of my files or of my objects. I want to only view 5,000, and the query string, the query type is of type query string, and the query is the user input. And then after you get your parameters all set up, you can send it via this request.get, and then the URL string that you made, headers, content, type, application JSON, and then you send it up. You send as a JSON the Elasticsearch query that you built in the line above. This I think is probably kind of strange, but you do have to use a strange syntax to get the items out, which in this case it's you're looking in the context of the body in the hits. You're going 3 levels down to get the items that you want, and you can use it with hits and hits. So you get hits.get hits. And then essentially what I did here is I just made an empty list and I appended the items that I wanted. In this case, if I want just to get the file ID, so just the primary key, this is a dictionary that contains all of the fields that I'm getting back. So if I just want to get solely the ID, so not file ID colon and then whatever the key value is, you can implement it this way. And then it appends it to this query result and returns it back to the view. So in this case, when I run something like this, I can say, okay, well, I instantiate my class, and then I call the full text search, passing in the search phrase. And if I want to tie it into the Django ORM, what I would do is I would say, okay, well, file elements.objects.filter and primary key in the list that I provide. One last thing, we need to make sure that we pass the Django query set object into our contents dictionary rather than the Django or the Elasticsearch list results. I go back to the home page, I search something. I get, in this case, 2 files now instead of the one that I got before, because Elasticsearch was conducting the search, and then it passed the primary keys back to the Django ORM to actually just return those query set objects that Elasticsearch found. Another cool thing you can do is, let's say you just wanted to bypass the Django ORM entirely. So instead you would like Elasticsearch to do all of the search characteristics and then just return you the Elasticsearch list that it found, rather than trying to tie this into the ORM, because this is actually a little bit redundant because you actually have to do 2 database calls, one to the Elasticsearch and one to the Django ORM. Again, you can do the same kind of thing very easily. So let's just get rid of that. Very few modifications actually need to be done in order to do that. So again, I'm going to stick with essentially the exact same structure I had before. So the only thing I'm going to change now is instead of this includes field, so essentially how this reads is it looks for the source. Includes is the fields that you want to return back. You can dictate a size. In this case, I always dictate 5,000 because on my production application, we have actually an insane amount of files. So I don't want to return 10,000 files back because I searched something dumb like A*A. And the query string, and then the query that I'm actually looking for. In this case, I sort it by the Elasticsearch score that it gets, and I search it in descending order because the higher the score is, the more relevant of the file. So the easy way you can do this is, which is not so pretty. In this case, I know my model's field, so if I come here, I can see here all the elements of my model and the different, in this case, there's column names within the MySQL database that's relating to each file. So what I do is I convert that into a list and essentially say fields, and instead of passing in this single includes, including the return field, I pass in the includes field as a whole, and instead of popping the list and just getting the individual ID, I just append the result here. So I know this sounds a little complicated, but honestly, after you put in, I would say, 10 minutes, if you don't really know how this works with just referencing the Elasticsearch application, it only takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes max to build something like this. But then you have the complete flexibility and you match directly with what is on the Elasticsearch homepage. Oh, and I should show you how it works. So in this case, I'll just go back to the home screen again. And if I type in something, you can see, again, I get the same 2 objects. This works a little bit more when I type in something more generic, but I also have the whole power of the Elasticsearch application. So I know my kids have a lot of really strange files relating to like their homework and school stuff. So if I type in, for example, kids, I can see like, there's obviously a record that's just called kids spelling really funny, because I think this is when my son was learning to type. You can see the kids classroom schedule, file 1 has something to do with kids. Something down here has something to do with my kids' folders. I'm guessing it's related to the file directories. But I can also now implement things that Django normally can't do. So for example, if I wanted to search something with thing in it. So if I search something with thing, you notice nothing pops up. But with Elasticsearch, I can implement like star thing star. Ooh, let's do that correctly. And now I get 2 files, when normally if I were to run this in Django doing the Django way, I may or may not retrieve anything because the normal Django application doesn't know, and the Django RM doesn't recognize star in the same way. Hope this is helpful. If anyone has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. Thanks.